He was 5'5", wore tailored jackets, and shook hands like a statesman. But behind closed doors, Joseph Stalin barely trusted his own shadow. He once had a man executed because he smiled too confidently, another for coughing too loudly. At some point, even his most loyal bodyguard learned to blink quietly. Yet millions worshipped him, toasted his name at dinners, wept in public when he died, and never once saw the trembling child hiding behind his iron mustache. Stalin is not unique. He is simply part of a club, a dark fraternity of rulers who all read from the same script without ever meeting. They come from different places. Kim Jong-il was born in a Siberian village, Gaddafi in a Bedouin tent. Idi Amin was a cook before he wore a crown. Yet somehow they all think the same, speak the same, act the same. It's not coincidence, it's psychology. Paranoia wrapped in power. They rise in chaos, always. Hitler climbed the ruins of the Weimar Republic. Saddam Hussein rode in on coups and assassinations. Chaos is their cradle. People think they take power, but usually it's given to them, offered up by desperate people begging to be rescued or ruled. In 1933, Hitler was appointed chancellor, not elected supreme leader, not crowned by force, just invited into the house. The wolf politely shown the door. But power changes them fast. The first few months are smiles, promises, a little nationalism, a little hope. Then the mask cracks. They start erasing the press, not all at once, just the ones that lie. Then the journalists vanish. Then the questions stop. Next comes the myth-making. Stalin never aged. Kim Jong-il was born under a double rainbow. Saddam's novels were bestsellers no one read. They rewrite their own biographies. They remove the pain, the weakness, the failures. And if history doesn't cooperate, they rewrite history too. Gaddafi didn't allow his name to be spoken casually. In state media, he was brotherly leader and guide of the revolution, like some celestial babysitter. They flood the streets with their faces, statues, posters, billboards, not just for pride, but for surveillance. If you don't look at the poster, someone notices. North Koreans don't just hang portraits of Kim Il-sung. They clean them daily. They angled them perfectly. Dust as disloyalty. Why? Because belief is currency. And if they can't make you love them, they'll settle for making you pretend. The dictator doesn't need your faith, just your obedience. But deep down, he wants more. He wants worship, a holy devotion, a kind of twisted immortality. And so he builds a cult. He becomes father, god, warlord, and ghost. He is the sunrise and the flood, the famine and the feast. Even their suffering becomes his gift. Stalin's purges weren't terror, they were purification. Mao's famines weren't failure, they were sacrifice. To them, mass death isn't horror. It's theater, a reminder that even life itself belongs to the throne. But they're always afraid, always. That's the part people miss. These men of power are scared, deeply, chronically afraid. Stalin slept in a different room every night. Saddam Hussein used dozens of body doubles. Kim Jong-un travels in a bulletproof train. They don't fear war, they fear silence. The moment the crowd stops cheering, the second their name doesn't echo loud enough, because they know it's fragile. They know power isn't real, not in the way loyalty is real, or love, or truth. So they build louder lies. They hold parades so enormous they drown out the whispers. They pass laws that say they are eternal. They surround themselves with flatterers and executioners. And when the walls close in, they always react the same. They don't retreat, they expand. They blame, they lash out. Hitler's final year was spent in a bunker, commanding armies that didn't exist. Gaddafi broadcast speeches from hiding spots. Saddam recorded tapes like a mixtape messiah. They try to hold on, even when their own people turn, even when the generals get quiet, even when the statues crack and lean, because in their mind they are the nation. Without them, there is no identity, no pride, no glory, just dust. Mussolini said, "The state is me." And for a while, Italy agreed, until he was shot and hung upside down like laundry. There's a reason they die violently, or in hiding, or in bed with the curtains drawn, because they don't know how to end. No dictator ever does. They don't just fear death. They fear being forgotten. That's why their names are on airports, textbooks, songs, cities. But history remembers what they forget. That terror doesn't last. That truth leaks through cracks. That statues fall harder than they rise. The dictator always underestimates the people. Always. He thinks he owns their minds. But minds are slippery things. He thinks he's the smartest man in the room. But smart men don't need to kill their friends just to sleep. And he thinks he's different. That he'll be the one to beat history, that his myth will live on. But myths burn too. They all fall. Not always quickly, not always loudly, but they fall. Because tyranny isn't a legacy. It's a disease. They don't understand that fear is fuel, but it burns out. And when it runs dry, all that's left is smoke and memory. The people who once saluted start looking over their shoulders. The whispers get braver. The eyes stop lowering. That's how it begins. In 1989, Nicolae Ceausescu stood on a balcony in Romania, giving one of his usual God-King speeches. He expected cheers. Instead, the crowd booed. He blinked, stammered, confused. For the first time in decades, reality reached him, and he didn't know what to do. 3 days later, he was shot. His reign ended not with war, but with a microphone glitch and an awkward silence. This is what dictators always forget. The crowd they control can flip in an instant. Not out of courage, but exhaustion. The mask they wear begins to crack. Not because someone ripped it off, but because it was too heavy to hold forever. Stalin's death brought more relief than grief. His inner circle didn't cry. They scrambled for air like drowning men, surfacing after years underwater. Even Khrushchev, one of his most obedient dogs, later called him a mad tyrant. But only after he was gone. Always after. That's how they operate fear while he lives, honesty when he dies. The dictator is only human after he stops breathing. In North Korea, Kim Jong-il's death was broadcast with weeping crowds, people falling to their knees. But how many of those tears were real? In a land where not crying hard enough can get you arrested, grief becomes performance. Sorrow becomes survival. This is a psychological prison dictators build, not just around their people, but inside them, where emotion becomes currency. In Iraq, Saddam had murals of himself in every town, posing with a sword, with a rifle, with angelic lighting, as if he were legend carved into stone. But when Baghdad fell, they didn't wait. Crowds tore the statues down with their bare hands. They spat on his posters. They danced in the rubble, because all that fear had fermented into hate. And hate, when uncorked, floods fast. The tyrant thinks his face is immortal. But the truth is, his face is just the target everyone's been aiming at. And still every new one thinks he's the exception. Hitler believed the Third Reich would last 1,000 years. It didn't survive past 12. Mussolini thought the Romans would chant his name forever. But history gave him only one word: hanged. Even modern tyrants haven't learned. Vladimir Putin poisons opponents and silences media, clinging to a legacy already cracking under its own weight. He stages photo ops with tigers and shirtless rides, like a parody of masculinity. But underneath, he shows the same fear as the rest. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of being exposed. Fear that one day someone will write a story just like this about him. Dictators don't trust anyone, not even their children. Gaddafi had sons who turned on each other. Saddam's sons lived like untouchable gods until they were gunned down. Even the Kim dynasty walks on glass. One brother was assassinated with poison in an airport. Another disappeared. No throne is safe when it's built on blood. They create dynasties not out of love but necessity, because they think maybe if their bloodline rules, they'll live on. But history doesn't love blood. It loves irony. That's why the tyrant's greatest fear isn't death. It's obscurity. It's being forgotten, erased, reduced to a trivia question, a failed chapter, a name people can't pronounce anymore. So they write books, they name cities after themselves, they film documentaries about their own greatness. It's not leadership, it's insecurity. True leaders build nations. Dictators build mirrors. They want to see themselves everywhere because they don't know who they are without applause. And they are addicts. Addicted to control, to loyalty, to the silence of the room when they enter. They punish doubt like betrayal, because in their world, truth is treason, honesty is rebellion, and curiosity is a weapon. Under Stalin, people were arrested for jokes. Under Mao, for dreams. Under Kim, for blinking at the wrong moment. Because when fear rules, even thoughts are dangerous. And so people stop thinking, or pretend to. That's how dictatorships survive. Not through bullets alone, but through silence, ritual, and practiced lies. Children in Turkmenistan once sang songs about their dictator's golden soul. In Haiti, Papa Doc claimed to be the earthly voice of God. But the louder the devotion, the weaker the throne. The more praise demanded, the more fragile the power. Because if you really rule with strength, why would you need to force love? Why would you need to ban jokes? The answer is always the same. Because deep down they know they are frauds. That their greatness is airbrushed. That their titles are costumes. They know history will strip them naked, and that the people already see through the fabric. So they cling, they censor, they kill. Not out of strength, but desperation. And it never lasts. Not once, no matter the country. No matter the army, no matter the illusion. Because fear isn't loyalty. Power isn't love. And parades don't protect you when the roof caves in. And it always does. They always think they're building something permanent. But even stone erodes. Even fear gets tired. Even lies start to stink in the sunlight. When Ceausescu fell, his own guards stepped aside. When Mussolini fled, even his inner circle abandoned him. When Gaddafi died, it was in a ditch, begging for mercy. The end is rarely cinematic. It's usually messy, pathetic, embarrassing. Because tyrants don't just lose power, they lose dignity. The people who once painted his murals now tear them down. The generals who toasted him now swear they hated him all along. History rewrites itself overnight. But what about the people? What about those who lived under him? They don't cheer, not right away. First they stare, quiet, unsure if it's really over. Because dictators teach you not to trust freedom. not to dream, not to believe in anything that isn't monitored, licensed, or approved. That's why when the tyrant falls, the silence feels heavier than the cheers, because people are trying to remember who they were before him. That's the real damage, not just the prisons, not just the blood, but the way they erase identity, replace it with fear, with slogans, with routines. Mao had 1 billion people waving little red books, but most didn't believe in them. They believed in survival, and when he died, they didn't erupt in rage. They just kept walking, kept breathing, quietly untangling themselves from the lie. The dictator never gets to see this. He never sees the healing, because healing only begins when he leaves. The TV stations change tone, the books return, the jokes come back, the air feels different, like people can finally breathe in full sentences, but not always. Sometimes the next one rises fast, with the same promises, the same charm, the same iron underneath the velvet, because people forget, or because the system never changed, or because freedom is fragile and chaos is hungry. In Russia, Stalin died, but his ghost still haunts the Kremlin. In Egypt, Mubarak fell only to be replaced by military suits in new colors. That's the final trick of the tyrant. He dies, but he leaves behind the architecture, the fences, the fear, the habits. And the new ruler walks in, smiles, and pulls the same levers, because the machine still works. So how do you stop it? How do you break the cycle? You start by recognizing the signs. The dictator doesn't arrive with blood on his hands. He arrives with a smile, a promise, and a flag. He says he'll clean things up, that he's different, that the nation needs discipline, that enemies are everywhere, that only he can fix it. He demands loyalty, not competence. He fills the airwaves with his voice. He makes everything about him, even when it's not. He makes you choose, not between ideas, but between him and chaos, between him and traitors, between him and death. That's not politics. That's a hostage situation. You stop it by asking questions, early, loudly, publicly, because the longer people whisper, the harder it is to shout. You protect the press, you fund education, you teach people to think, to doubt, to speak, even when it's uncomfortable, because dictators don't fear guns, they fear minds. You teach people to recognize the bait, nationalism without truth, unity without questions, pride without accountability. And you remember the names, not just the ones who ruled, but the ones who resisted. You remember Sophie Scholl, who distributed anti-Nazi leaflets. You remember Anna Politkovskaya, who wrote the truth in Putin's Russia. You remember every voice that spoke when silence was safer, because the only antidote to dictatorship is memory. Memory sharp enough to cut through lies. Memory long enough to see the pattern. Memory stubborn enough to say, not again. And if you're watching this thinking, this could never happen here, then you've already forgotten how it always starts. No dictator ever says, I am the villain. They say, I am the cure. They don't ban elections. They rig them. They don't jail the innocent. They redefine guilt. They don't silence the press. They just call it fake, over and over, until no one knows what's real anymore. And once the fog sets in, they move fast, because confusion is the soil where tyranny grows. But even then, they're still afraid, because they know the truth lives in back rooms, in basements, in the space between jokes, in glances exchanged when the cameras are off. Truth is slippery. You can outlaw it, but you can't kill it. Not really. And the people? The people remember more than tyrants think. They remember the neighbor who vanished, the breadline, the silence, The posters, the day the music stopped. They carry it, quietly, generation after generation, until one day someone speaks and the silence breaks like glass. That's how the story ends. Not with a bang, not with a war, but with a whisper, a sentence, a truth spoken out loud for the first time in years. And then the statues fall. The dictator always acts the same. Because power doesn't invent character, it reveals it. And fear never ages. But people learn, slowly, painfully, permanently. And when they finally remember what he took from them, they don't just want freedom. They want his name erased.